Hello and welcome to Your Property Podcast. My name is Michelle Cairns, and with us today I've got a very special guest, Topher Morrison, all the way from Topher. Where are you tuning in from today?
Today from Tampa, Florida, actually in my home studio, or not home studio. I don't know why I said
I
home
bet it's a lot
studio. I don't have
sunnier
a home
over there.
studio at my home in Tampa. I don't know. Anyway, I'm from Tampa.
Amazing. Well, we don't have many international guests, but we did connect through a training program that I've been on in the past with Daniel Priestley, and you were one of the speakers for that, and delivered a module on delivering pictures, which always kind of stuck with me because, and it's been a year or so since I heard that, and I thought, you know what, we really need to get Topher on to talk to our audience because pictures are such an integral part of what we do as property investors. But before we get into that, just want to, obviously what you do is introduce yourself and pitch to people all day long. So do you want to tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my company is Personify. We're a training and development firm. We specialize in creating award-winning pitches for business leaders that have to communicate with clarity and credibility in their markets. Which pretty much, by the way, when you think about it, is every business owner. I've been a professional speaker for over 35 years, wrote a couple of books on the topic. And one of the things that I've noticed over that time period is how business owners rarely take the time out of their day to script a perfectly repeatable pitch. And as a result of that, they end up winging it when they're out there in their market speaking to people who could potentially become business. So instead of them delivering a pitch, they're actually practicing a pitch, which I think is the wrong thing to do in front of your market. The result is they usually have inconsistent performance, right? Because even if they hit a home run and they just knock it out of the park, they don't know what they said to create that, so they can't duplicate it. So they end up creating a strong level of inconsistency. And then that just gets worse as their business starts to grow and they hire on people to also communicate what they do, but because they've never perfected their pitch, they can't teach a perfect pitch to their team. And as a result, everybody just kind of starts doing their own thing. And that usually leads to having a real unclear niche or an unclear market. So they start working with just all different types of individuals. So we solve that problem at Personify by creating perfectly repeatable pitches that they actually memorize word for word to such a degree that it feels natural, it feels effortless for them. And then by having that so well rehearsed, they can actually think 2 or 3 sentences ahead. They can improvise, they can riff off the top and have that kind of flexibility to make it feel organic, but yet still following a very specific structure to do that. I'm a little bit of a weird wordsmith. I'm on a mission to get people to stop throwing their pitch around like pigeon feed and really make sure that it's rehearsed and well delivered.
Well, just to picking up on a few things there, you said about the structure, and obviously, we don't have time to go into the full structure of what that looks like to create it. But, let's think about some things that people can take away just from listening to this podcast today. What creates, what are the key elements in an excellent pitch? So let's say for a lot of people who are listening, they will be going to networking meetings and typically they have the opportunity to stand up for 20 seconds and pitch, essentially say what they want. So how can they pick out those key elements? What are they?
Yeah. So it's a fantastic question. So, and you're right, by the way, the structure itself, we could literally spend, like if I do a private consult, I'm spending a minimum of 2.5 hours with that person to build into that structure. But there are some things that I think every listener could walk away with and kind of implement immediately. So I have a couple of foundational principles that I like to follow in a pitch. One of my first foundational principles is to eliminate all of the jargon. Just get rid of the acronyms and the complexities and trying to make it sound like something which is an industry standard. And the pushback I always get on that from people is they go, well, I'm not going to be pitching to people outside of my industry, so everybody understands those. And I'm like, well, I think you've kind of missed the point, because sure, you can use jargon and you can use acronyms for people inside your industry, but you're making a big leap there that those people in the industry actually know what that jargon or that acronym means, right? I think there's a lot of people in business nowadays that, quite frankly, as well in life, they're kind of faking it. All right, they don't understand something, but they just smile through it. This is probably more of an American reference, but I call it the Joey Tribbiani smile. If you remember from the TV show Friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. He never got the jokes, right? And so he kind of had that blank smile on his face and he would fake the laughs in the jokes. And I think that's what a lot of people do in business. So just even assuming that people in your industry know what that jargon means, I think is a false assumption. It's certainly a brave one. And I would rather just get rid of that to where even if you're not speaking to people in your industry, like you never know when you're going to be at a barbecue or at a family reunion and you're speaking to somebody who might very well be married to that person in the industry, but because they don't speak the jargon, they don't recognize it. And I think that's probably one of the markers for a good pitch is that when you pitch well, that person that you're pitching to should either say, oh my God, we need to talk, or oh my God, I need to introduce you to so and so. And if they do that, then they can actually expand that network and get the business that they otherwise may have missed if they're just using too much technical jargon.
Yeah. So, for example, I work with YPN, your Property Network magazine, and we are the UK's leading magazine and training community. Actually, I can simplify that by saying I work with a property education company. What a property education company is, even if they're outside of the industry. So that's one
Yeah, I
example.
mean,
Do you have any other examples of simplifying?
yeah, it's so simple. It's like even if they're not familiar with the industry, by just natural, common sense, they're gonna understand what that is. I'll share with you one of my favorite examples of this. I met a person one time who came to me, and when they introduced themselves, they said that they were a cranial prosthetic engineer. And like I was properly impressed, right? I'm like, oh man, I'm meeting a neurosurgeon or something, right? So I was immediately kind of like intimidated. I was also impressed. At who they were and what they did. But as we kept talking, I found out that a cranial prosthetic engineer was somebody who made wigs. And it was like, I remember, I kind of tried to make them feel good about what they said. But like, as I left, I walked away just going, wow, I had them up on this pedestal here. And then when I finally found it was like there was a disconnect. And it's not like being a wig maker is less than being a cranial prosthetic engineer, but it's a false perception, right? Like, and so I always tell people, I say, don't try to decorate what you do with a bunch of fancy words that make it sound more important than it is, because there's no shame in being a wig designer. I mean, this is a person who builds wigs for kids that have lost their hair because of their chemotherapy treatments. That's pretty damn noble, right? You don't have to make it sound more important than it is. It's already incredibly powerful. And so I always say, just get rid of the fancy words and just try to keep it as simple as you possibly can. And if you do that, like your job isn't to be cute during a pitch. Your job is to be repeatable during a pitch, right? That's how you know you've delivered a great pitch. If you can ask that person, tell me what I said I do, and they can repeat it back, you got a good pitch.
Keeping it real as well, because people can then just connect with you. There's the authenticity, and they understand who you are without all of that jargon, right?
Yeah.
So let's say people are at this meeting and they stand up. They might be one of 100 people, and the buzz is going. They've got that 10-20 seconds to kind of get across whatever it is they're saying for their pitch. Any other tips on how they can stand out from the crowd?
Well, one of the ways that you can stand out is you can make sure that they hear you, right? Because the reality is, most of the time when you're in those kind of environments where you got that 20-30 seconds to stand up and deliver your pitch, most people's window of listening, as we like to refer to it, is so incredibly small. Because first off, they're not concerned about who you are. They're concerned about how they're going to introduce themselves. So one kind of like a cool strategy is to pay attention to who's pitched before you. Because the people who have already stood up and pitched before you, their window of listening is going to be larger than the people who have yet to pitch. So I try to strategically place myself in an area where I'm going to, like, by just inference of where they're going around, I'm going to be able to get half the room. So I try to sit somewhere in the middle. So I know that no matter which aisle or place they start, I'm going to win half that audience. And then when I deliver the pitch, I'm really going to try to make more eye contact with the individuals who have already delivered their pitch, because I know their window of listening is open, where the other people are still probably, especially the ones that are closest to me, they're not listening to anything I have to say because they know they're going to be on the spotlight rather quickly. So I will focus on the people who've already spoken and the people who are down on the other end of the line who may not be as concerned yet. And that's a really great way to make sure that you're standing out without having to be cute and trying to be memorable and all that stuff. Just make sure that they're hearing you. Yeah.
Okay. So being at networking events is just one of the places people might pitch and tell other people about what they do. But as property investors, we'll be talking to vendors and landlords and agents, sources, lots of different people within our industry. So whether you're talking to an agent or you're talking to the owner of a property, you're probably going to be saying something different. So how does that work? Where do you need 10 different pitches to kind of have to hand?
You may, right? There's two ways we can address that. One would be if you find yourself pitching to multiple people, if they're all in the same industry, that's one thing. But the one thing I see a lot of people is they go, well, I need, you have a problem with your business model if you have multiple business cards, right? Because then you don't know which one to pass out, right? So the people are kind of hedging their bets and they've got all these different cards for all these different possible markets. That's problematic. I generally try to encourage most people to get clear on what the best one would be and then pitch for that one. In fact, let's talk about that next. Let's talk about why people try to hedge their bets. But to answer your specific question here, you may need to have multiple ways of communicating based upon, like you said, if it's the customer, if it's the vendor or whatnot. And so it's always a good idea to understand what are the problems of the vendors? What are the problems of the customers? What are the problems of all of the different people who you might be involved with and how working with you can help solve that problem. But the general structure of the pitch will always be the same. And this is why I say, if you have it like, for example, I have 4 different credibility pieces in my pitch. And if I were to use all 4 of my credibility pieces, I would most likely scare people off. They would just think that I'm full of myself if I'm going through all these different things, right? So I will pick the one that I think would be the best for that situation. If I'm in an academic environment, I talk about my MBA from Oxford. If I'm in a social environment, I might talk about the fact that I'm a published author. If I'm in an industry industry market where there's other professional speakers, I'll talk about my 35 plus years experience in professional speaking, because I think those will respond differently to the market. So it is a good idea to kind of understand who you might be speaking to and then have something that you can pull out of their pocket at any given time and it still sound perfectly natural.
Okay. And you wanted to say about why people have these different elements, these different pitches.
Yeah. Why they have multiple business cards, why they don't want to pitch for a specific niche market. I think the biggest thing there is fear, right? They're afraid that if they pitch for this one type of client, they're going to lose all of this extra business. And there is a certain amount of truth to that. Like just like everything in life, you have a bell curve, right? So you can be way too vague, you can find the sweet spot, and you can also be way too specific. But most people rarely ever err on the side of being too specific. They always err on the side of being too generic, right? And the reason for that is they have this fear that they're not going to be able to do business. So I always try to alleviate it by letting them know that the opposite tends to happen, right? So for example, I'm working on a pitch right now for a client of mine. Her sweet spot is working with companies that produce over $100 million in revenue per annum. And yet half of her clients don't produce over 100 million. But she knows that her best clients do that. So I said, well, let's just get rid of all of this 50 million and 25 million, and let's just pitch for the 100 million or more. But then the people that make less won't want to work with me. And I said, no, actually just the opposite will happen. You'll create what I call the velvet rope mentality, right? Where all of a sudden, if you say I work exclusively with $100 million companies or more, the one thing you can guarantee is that if a company's doing 50 million, they wish they were doing 100, right? So those less than $100 million firms will see that she works with $100 million or more firms. And by the very fact that that's a very prestigious thing, they're going to want to get into that elite market. So what ends up happening is they usually will say something like, well, I don't make 100 million, but would you work with me anyway? And that's the best position to be in, right? Because one of the phrases that we talk about from the training company that we were talking about earlier, we always say you pitch for the market, you pitch for the niche, but you do business in the market. So think of like a dartboard, right? Your niche is the bullseye, and you're always going to aim for that bullseye. But you can win an entire game of darts without ever hitting the bullseye. In fact, most games are won by not hitting the bullseye. They're hit by strategically hitting all of the other aspects of the dartboard. So your niche is the bullseye, your market is the dartboard, and then there's the wall, which you never want to go to, right? You never want to throw a dart there. So I always say we pitch for our bullseye, but we do business in the market depending upon our availability. So if she's pitching that she works with $100 million or more companies and somebody goes, well, I don't make 100 million, so I guess I wouldn't qualify. At that point in time, based upon her level of capacity, she can say, we have a few clients that we know have the potential to get to 100 million and we work with them. And oh, well, would you work with me? Yeah, sure. If she has the capacity. But if she doesn't, the best thing for her to do is to say, yeah, I'm sorry, but when you get to 100 million, call us. Because I guarantee you, a $50 million per annum company, they can get to 100 million and they've already been sold on her. As soon as they hit that market, they're going to go, we qualify now. Can we work? So it's just better.
Okay. And just before you mentioned about talking about people's problems and how to solve that, and then you also talked about the your credibility as well. So how do you balance out between using that pitch to address people's problems? Is it like a percentage, or is it how do you kind of
Yeah,
allocate the time?
fair question. I don't know that I have a percentage, but I do know this. I know that if you're worried about and trying to remember what to say in a pitch, all of your attention is going to be internally focused, right? But if you have a memorized pitch that you've delivered so many times, you can deliver it in your sleep, inside out and backward, right? Then what happens is you no longer have to be internally focused on what's the next thing I'm supposed to say. You can be externally focused on what are the nonverbals that I'm picking up from my listener, the person who's listening to my pitch. And I think that's far more effective because then you notice little tiny subtle things. Like every once in a while, you might notice that they go, and they just have this facial expression on their face that doesn't quite match what you thought should match based upon your pitch. And if you start getting that same facial expression every single time they say this one thing, you may need to realize, okay, I need to go refine my pitch. I'll give you a great example of this. One of my favorite clients here in Tampa, Florida, Michael McCoy. He's a brilliant corporate headshot photographer. And this is the guy who delivered his pitch thousands of times. And he really took it to heart when we said, if you're within an arm's reach of somebody, do your pitch, whether they're listening or not, just for the sake of practice. And he got so good at delivering his pitch, he noticed that when he would say one particular phrase, he would say in his pitch, he would talk about the problem, and he would say something to the effect of, I'll see if I can remember it. He would say, very early on, I realized there was a difference between a corporate headshot and a celebrity headshot. And he kept getting this kind of weird look. And then some people would say, well, I'm no celebrity. And he was able to start seeing a pattern on that. And so he shifted his pitch from, I noticed there was a difference between the typical corporate headshot and the celebrity headshot. And he phrased it to just a subtle difference. And he said, I noticed there was a difference between how people responded to a corporate headshot versus a celebrity headshot. And that's where and then he could go into his pitch. And the fact that he was just able to insert that little phrase about how they responded to change the focus from the context of the photograph to the emotions that the people looking at. And that's what he was going for. And I don't think we could have ever known that in scripting the pitch until he delivered it so many times. He saw that pattern. And that's one thing that's really great. So I go back to this notion that if you have it so well memorized, you don't have to think about it. You get to pay attention to the person. And that's even better because then you'll also notice if that window of listening is closing or opening. Right? Because depending upon what you're saying, they might be leaning in and nodding their head, or they might be looking over your shoulder. If you're delivering your pitch and somebody's looking over your shoulder, their window of listening is closed. Move on. Some will, some won't. So what? Who's next? Shake their hand and go to somebody else. Don't try to get them back. They've already shut down. Yeah.
Is there an ideal time? So if you're meeting someone for the first time, and obviously people say about the elevator pitch, or the 20-second pitch. But aside from that, let's say you're in a social context and you are telling people about what you do. Do you think it's better to kind of just say your piece and then go into the conversation and ask them, or is it appropriate to add more information?
I can answer that in two ways. First one, the most honest answer there would be, that's like asking how long should a piece of string be? Well, it just needs to be as long as it needs to be, right? So a pitch needs to be as long as it needs to be in order for them to continue to listen. But the moment they've stopped listening, you shouldn't go any further, right? So that's the real answer. But nobody likes that answer, right? What they want is a time frame. So here's what I would say. I would say that you should be able to get through your elevator pitch in less than 15 seconds, max.
Right.
And I think if you were to do some sort of like a social pitch where you're maybe delivering to a small group of people or something, 90 seconds would be my target to get done as the max. I'd still like to stay under a minute. I'd still like to stay under 10 seconds for the elevator pitch. But yeah, 10 to 15 seconds max for an elevator pitch, no more than 90 seconds if you want a time frame. But really, just a matter of how long they're listening. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so the difference there, so you're talking about, different settings. And I know you've got so much experience with public speaking as well as writing a book on public speaking, ebook on public speaking. So what is the difference in the style of presentation when you're talking one-to-one and when you're talking to a larger group?
Fantastic question. So that goes into one of my other principles. So one of my other principles in delivering an effective pitch is that each component of your pitch ideally should be its own independent thought that makes grammatical sense without anything before it or anything after it. Because if you can deliver, like, for example, like focusing on 8 components of a pitch, which would be clarity, credibility, identifying the problems, providing the solution, sharing your motivation, talking about the opportunities, giving people the next steps to take advantage of those opportunities, and then leaving them with a positive impression. Those would be like the 8 components of a standard, like what could happen during a pitch. Each of those 8 pieces should be their own independent thought. So you could theoretically mix and match them and put them in any order. Because then what happens is you've got your rehearsed deliverable where okay, well, this is if nobody's interrupting me and the window of listening is there and I'm on stage, I can start here and end here and deliver them all fine. But in like you said, a one-on-one or a social environment, they may ask you a question that is answered in part 6 of your pitch. And the last thing you want to do is say, well, hold that thought. Let me go through my entire pitch first so this makes sense. You want to be able to just jump ahead to that. So what I've done with, like, for example, with my pitch, I have each component independent. So if somebody were to ask me a credibility question, I can go immediately to credibility. If they were to ask me a motivation question, I can go immediately to my motivation. And I can answer those depending upon where their window of listening is at.
And how important are the words? Because there's this idea, isn't there, that the body language is 60% and then your tone is another percentage and then words 10%, doesn't it? So in terms of delivering the pitch and all of those other non-verbal aspects, how do you build that in when you're speaking to people?
Critical, right? I think we could debate all day long whether or not the 7% of words is communication. Words are 7% of communications. Tone is 38%. Physiology is 55%. I know the guy that actually developed that study many, many years ago has repeatedly tried to get people to stop echoing it because he said it was for a very specific situation. But there's the credibility there, right? There's some legitimacy. We know for a fact that nonverbal communication is a major part of how people receive things. So regardless, like you said, of what the percentages are, we can't deny that tone, speed, volume, your distance, your proximity to the person, all of those things play a role. To what degree? I don't know, but I do know this. I know that if there's any hesitancy in your delivery of your pitch, even if you can get the pitch out, chances are some of those nonverbals are going to be like they talk about a tell in poker, right? I think that's a tell, right? So they'll be able to see that, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously they'll pick up something's not quite right. They're saying one thing, but their nonverbals are much more insecure. And that's why I constantly go back to rehearsal. That's the best way, because when you're out in the real world, you never want to be practicing your pitch. You want to be delivering your pitch. And sadly, most people just practice it. Yeah.
So what's the best way to practice? Is it just in front of a mirror? Is it, record yourself, listen back?
Yeah. Yeah, fair question. I think number one, being a part of a group that allows you to practice is a great thing to do, right? So even if that's just an informal amount of just getting a couple of business owners together and say, hey guys, let's practice our pitch on a daily basis, right? Or on a weekly basis. I think that's a great environment. So put yourself in some sort of a mastermind group or a training group where mistakes are encouraged and it's a safe environment to do that. And by screwing it up, you're not risking a sale. That's one thing, right? The second thing is, if you can't get that, if you don't have that luxury, pitch in front of a mirror, right? Just practice it every day. Put down into your if you got your planners and you're developing what you need to be doing during the day, literally put that down as a daily discipline. Practice pitch. right? And maybe you want to do it like if maybe you've just got it scripted out and you want to memorize it. Maybe you literally put down on your planner, practice pitch once, practice pitch twice, practice pitch 3 times. So you can check it off each time you do it. And then just make sure that each day you're standing up in front of a mirror, you're delivering that pitch. Or even better, because of technology nowadays, getting on your laptops like we are right now or your computers and recording yourself delivering the pitch so you can watch it back later. Because I will tell you this, there's nobody who's going to be more critical of your pitch than yourself when you're watching your own pitch, right? It's very, very telling. Yeah.
That's true. And you're right. Yeah, there's lots of, I hadn't even thought about networking events that just, like Toastmasters or local speaking groups that you can join. They're all over the country and easy to join those. So yeah, they're,
Or you can create
that's
your own,
something.
right? Like if you
Yeah,
can't find one, just go, fuck it, I'll initiate it myself and then call some of your fellow business owners and go, what do you say we get together on Zoom once a week and we just practice our pitch and we get feedback? Something simple like that, right? Yeah.
At the beginning, you said about, there are so many people out there who just wing it. And, when you said that, it makes me cringe a little bit when I think back to, just standing up at those networking meetings and the amount of times that I have written it out. I definitely have not practiced it enough. And on the way to the meeting, I'm there in the car and I'm trying to repeat it myself and, and get my head around these words and that kind of thing. But yeah, just in that context where you're going to a networking meeting, you've got this 20 seconds, okay. But in terms of the value of being confident in what you do and being able to communicate that, like that's so huge, isn't it? But so many people don't take the time to prepare that pitch. So basically, like, why not and why should they?
Here's a great comparison, right? If you think about anybody out there, whether it be professional, in business, entertainment, right? Think about people who make a massive impact on you and get you to be emotionally moved, whether it be a musician or an actor or an actress or a business owner. If you reflect back to what they did, like I love using the musician analogy, right? When you see, like probably like one of my favorite bands is Maroon 5, right? I just love that band. And I've seen them live. And when I saw Maroon 5 live, like Adam, what's his name? Adam Levine, is that his name? I think the lead singer, right? He's out there on stage. He's got his guitar. I mean, that guy can play anything, right? But when he had his guitar, he would sit there and he would like almost play with the audience while he's doing a guitar solo. And like, he's not looking at the guitar solo and practicing. He's just like looking out at the audience and winking, flirting with the girls or whatever, right? He's just having a ball. And we look at that and he makes it look so effortless, right? He makes it look so natural and so smooth. And do you know why it looks so natural and so smooth and so effortless? Because that man's practiced that solo thousands of times, right? And we look at a presentation like Steve Jobs when he was alive, and he would release the iPhone or the iPad or whatever, and he looked so natural up on stage, and he just looked so conversational. It's because he practiced that pitch thousands of times. In fact, I was actually just reading a story about how when he delivered the iPod to the world, and the catchphrase was 1,000 songs in your pocket. When he delivered that, it just felt so natural because he tested that with thousands of people during the years of development for that, to where by the time he got up on stage, he had that memorized. And I think if we were to look at our jobs as we are essentially performers of our business. We even call them performance reviews, right? When we look at our employees, right? So if we are going to be a true professional performer, then what we do is we make sure that we have lots of practice before we ever perform. And it just goes back to that, taking the discipline and the time to go. And it doesn't take a lot, right? It's not like it is a guitar solo, right? That might take thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours. Ours might take 100, right? Like if you spend 100 hours on your pitch, I'm going to guarantee it's going to be a pretty solid pitch, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
For some people who are coming into the property industry, they want to come in for, a new way to earn money and a new business venture, and they're from a completely different corporate background. So a lot of people find themselves in transition, and actually they're not really sure what they are. They've got this identity crisis, and I say that because I've had that myself, where you're transitioning from different strategies or different roles.
Yeah.
So if for people who are in that transition, is there anything they can do, or is it kind of they've just got to figure something out in order to say something at the time?
Fantastic question. I'll start with what not to do, and then I'll go into what to do. Whatever you do, don't try to hide that past experience and try to fake it and make it look like now you've been an industry realty investor, property investor for the past 30 years. In fact, what you want to do is you want to go through your history, your past, and say, what traits or characteristics did that past lifetime look like that transfer nicely over to here, and how can I put that into my pitch so I can share with people openly, and just say, for 30 years of my life, I was in dentistry. And there were some key things that I picked up when by the way, I was never a dentist. I'm just making this up. There were some key things that I learned in working with the dentist. Number one, that everybody who sat in that chair, their problem was their biggest problem of the day. I might do 20 fillings in a day, but to that one person, that was their one filling. And I've realized to be able to take that level of compassion and compare that I would have for each person sitting in that chair. And I do the exact same thing now for property, because I know that while I might do 20 transactions a month, to that one person, that's their only transaction. And it better be a great experience, right? So you can transfer those characters and traits over from that past life into your current life and make it actually seem much more compelling.
Okay. That's a great answer. I love that.
Yeah.
You do so much more than pitching as well. So, you've got lots of other strings to your bows, and wider public speaking, and written lots of books as well. So for people who are looking to pitch themselves, pitch their businesses, but they are struggling with the confidence to do that, maybe even the self-belief. Do you have any tips for people who want to, I guess, just believe in themselves more and
Sure.
be
Yeah.
more confident?
Well, I'll answer that in two parts. Part one is very self-promotional. I have tons of free videos that people can go watch. Just go to YouTube and search my name, and you'll just see. In fact, I have a series called Minute to Pitch It, which are 52 60-second videos on how to pitch with power and clarity. So self-promotional, just go to YouTube and watch those videos. They're free, right? That's a great way to do it. The other thing that I would say to that would be get into some sort of a structured environment that allows you the ability to do that. Like you said, you talked about Toastmasters. That's a great organization. If you freak out at the thought of getting up in front of people and delivering a pitch, get to Toastmasters, because what Toastmasters is amazingly good at, they're amazingly powerful at identifying what your nervous tics are and eliminating them. They have a unique motivation for doing it. Which could be questionable, but I support it. I think it's fun that they will get you to hear all your ums and your ahs and your mks and ahs and all that stuff. I personally think that they go too far with it. And after a while, you need to put those things back in. Like when I'll script, I literally will script in ums and ahs to make it sound natural. Right. It was like you right there. I just stuttered. Stuttering is a natural thing that all humans do. But when we're reading a script or memorizing, we don't have those stutters. And I think we need to have those. We need to have little self-corrections and stuff. So when I'm creating like my teleprompter scripts, I'll have self-corrections, I'll have ums and ahs to make it sound natural. And I think sometimes in pitching, it's a good idea to do that as well. But get into some sort of a structured environment, whether it be Toastmasters or whether it be some sort of a networking group where you get to practice your pitch every single week, or going through like the Key Person of Influence program with Daniel Priestley out in the UK and Australia. Those things are phenomenal ways to get people to understand that structure. There was something else I wanted to mention, by the way, which will help people that have them that are a little bit nervous. One of the things, like, think about it this way: if you're nervous to speak, but you're trying to use a lot of big words to sound important, think about what kind of a tidal wave of confusion that can create, right? Because the last thing that you want to do is have to remember some multiple syllabic word. That's a tough word to say, right? When you're delivering a pitch, if you're already nervous. So one of my governing principles that I always go back to can be structured into word size and sentence size. And I'll share it with you this way. Why say in 7 words what you can say in 3? Or why say in 4 syllables what you can say in 2? So when you're developing your pitch, as you look at that, look at the sentences and say, is there a shorter way that I can say that and get the same meaning? That's one thing. And then once you've done that, then look at all of the words and say, is there another word that I could use there, which instead of having 5 syllables only has 2? Because if you can reduce that to the simplest word, A, the person who's listening will understand it. B, it's just easier to say when you're nervous and kind of tense about getting up and delivering that pitch. The last thing you want to do is have to stumble over a complex word.
Absolutely. Just talking about the Toastmasters, it makes me go back and remember my days of teaching. And when I got my first job as a teacher, they gave me the opportunity of a promotion to speak to 400 parents and all the staff in the room. And I'd been teaching 6 months and in this new role. And you know what? It wasn't great. It wasn't great, and that moment, one of those where there's a hole in the ground, it swallows you up. It was like that, and I vowed. I thought, right, okay, if I'm going to stick in this job, if they're going to let me carry on, I need to sort this out. So I went to Toastmasters, one of the equivalents, and I practiced my presentation for the most part of a year, right? And developed it. But there was a penny that dropped for me, and it was when I realised that actually I was so worried about me and what I was saying and how I was coming across and what they were thinking of me, that actually when I realised I was just really just talking to individuals in the room, I wasn't just talking to 400 people, I was just talking to one parent. Yes. And actually to take that emphasis and the focus away from myself and just, how can I help this parent and how can I relate to this person? Then that's when everything changed for me. So do you see that when people who you deal with have that fear element, and how do you kind of turn it around?
You nailed it 100%. A good presentation is just simply a conversation with a lot of people, right? You want to be able to speak as naturally as you would, like you and I are one-on-one, to 1 on to 100 or 1 on to 1,000, and you want to just have that conversation. Now, I will say this. If you start examining the laws of psychology or the human psychology, right, one thing you'll discover is that stress inhibits memory. So the more stressed you are, the less you're going to remember. Interestingly enough, relaxation expands memory. So the more relaxed you are, the more you're going to remember. This is why, by the way, we always remember to do those things right as we're getting ready to fall asleep. We're like, oh, I forgot to do something, right? And that, because we're so relaxed, our mind just unleashes things. So I always tell people, I say, if you're worried about remembering what to say, don't focus on the remembering, focus on the relaxation, and do things that will allow you to stay relaxed when you're in those high stress environments. So a couple of things. Number one, look at the biology of things. Like I try to, one of my goals when I get up on stage and I speak is I try to be just on the soft side of a little bit tired and a little bit sleepy, right? Like I don't want to get all amped up. Why? Because I know that if I drink a ton of caffeine to get amped up and alert, by the time I get up onto that stage, my adrenal glands will have naturally increased. And now I might be at that uncontrollable level of excitement. I've never once got up on stage and delivered a keynote and yawned it away, right? Like that's never happened because my adrenal glands are in full force. So don't do things biologically that will have you get more stressed. It'll just be harder for you to remember things. So be aware of your caffeine intake and your sleep and whatnot to make sure that when you're in those environments, you want to be alert, but you don't want to be overly hyperactive and stressed out because you'll probably just forget what you were supposed to say anyway. So I try to stay on the side of a little bit casual because then I know when I get on stage, I'm going to have that adrenaline. The other thing would be, and again, I start to sound like a bit of a broken record, the more rehearsed you are, the more relaxed you're going to be. The less rehearsed you are, the less relaxed you're going to be. And then the third thing for that, I'll share with you a really fun memory strategy that I picked up from my buddy Ron White, who's an American memory expert. He's got several world records. And one of the things that he shared with me, and I don't remember the exact terminology for it, but we tend to, as human beings, remember things that are crazy and embarrassing and weird. We tend to forget things that are normal and boring, right? So when you think about what you're pitching, I'm not in any way trying to stress that what we do as a business is boring, but it's not as exciting or as embarrassing or as traumatic as, I don't know, wetting your pants in front of an audience, right? I can't imagine anything worse than that, right? So like I guarantee you ever wet yourself in front of an audience, you'll never forget that, right? Well, 100%. That will stay with you for the rest of your life. So he says the more you can take the mundane, average, and normal and put that inside a context of something truly insane and radical, the easier it is to remember. So, for example, let's say I'm delivering, whether it's a pitch or a presentation to an audience of people, I will try to get to the environment beforehand. There's a backup to this, by the way, if you want to explore his memory technique. His name is Ron White. You can just Google Ron White memory champion, and there's tons of stuff out there. So I'll just tease you with this one thing, right? I'll get to the environment and I'll look at all of the key things around the room that I might notice, whether it's a speaker or an exit sign or a window. But I'll take those things that are like, no matter how nervous I am, I'll always see those things in order. And then I'll take the context of what I want to talk about in order, and I'll associate those to that weird thing. I shouldn't even admit this, but I was telling this keynote the other day. I have the story about a friend of mine that I call Redneck Ryan. He's a general contractor. And when I say Redneck Ryan, you can imagine exactly what he looks like. Flannel shirt, thick neck, beer belly, just a thick, stocky dude, right? Dirt under his fingernails. He's a general contractor. He's a rough and tumble kind of guy. And there was this speaker. And so I imagine that speaker and him doing like this weird pole dance on the speaker. I would never publicly admit that, although I just did right now and there. But that was so bizarre and so weird to think of Redneck Ryan, this tough guy, swinging around the mic stand like he's a pole dancer. That allowed me to remember that story. So I knew right when I got to I looked over and saw the speaker, and I'm like, oh, here's my story about Redneck Ryan now. And then I know I can just tell that story. So you can also associate different components of your pitch into different areas of the room if it's something you're familiar with, or there's another technique if you're in an unfamiliar environment. Just go find Ron White, Memory Champion. He'll share those with you.
Amazing. I think is it Memory Palace? One of those
Memory Palace. Yes, that's the technique where you put it in your home because you always remember what your home looks like. Yes,
that's amazing. I've used that one before. I've got visions of that presentation I mentioned and Harry Potter flying around the room in it. I still remember. Right, it was probably 10 years ago now.
It absolutely works, and you can do the exact same thing for your pitch. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you shared so much value with us today. Thank you so much, Topher. What are you up to at the moment then? So, are you writing any more books, or where can people find out more about what you're up to?
Well, one of my mottos with book writing is that I never tell people I'm writing a book. I only tell people I've written a book, because there's a million people out there are so-called writing a book and they never get to it. So I never talk about what I'm currently doing from a writing perspective until it's actually done. But yeah, I've written a couple of books, one of them specifically on public speaking, and I'm always trying to come up with and create new content. I will share with you this. One of my new projects that I'm coming up with, and I'm having a lot of fun with it, is I am an avid reader. I read an insane amount of books every year. Like I think I'm looking, and I always keep track of all the books that I've read. I can tell you right now, so far this year, and what are we in? What is this? We're recording this mid-March. Yeah. I've read 28 books so far this year. So I have no life basically. I just sit around with my dog and I read a lot. So I'm creating a new program called the Business Book Review, where I'm reviewing a bunch of books, and then I'm going to create a scorecard for people to answer the questions that will reveal where they're at in their entrepreneurial journey, and then recommend the top 10 business books for them at that time. Because the reality is any book could be a 5-star book if you read it at the right time. So the whole goal is to make sure I'm matching people up with the right books. So that's kind of a passion project I'm working on right now. We should have that launch we've recorded 30 episodes of the Business Book Review, and we're working on the layout right now. It should be released hopefully in the next 2 months. We'll have it all done.
Wow, that sounds exciting. Well, we look forward to seeing what that looks like. And where can people follow you, what you're up to on socials or
Yeah, sure. They can go in social media. I mean, there's not a lot of Topher Morrisons in the world. That's the benefit of being a weird named person. So as long as you spell that, and by the way, you can even probably spell Topher wrong, and Google will figure out what you meant. But tophermorrison.com is my main website. That's Topher, Morrison like Jim. Tophermorrison.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. Typical places that anybody else would exist, I suppose.
Fantastic. Well, we'll just encourage everyone to go and check you out, and obviously all your free resources on your website as well. Fantastic. So head over there and get practicing your pitch, guys. Topher, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing what happens next with your projects.
Thanks for the opportunity, Michelle. Appreciate you.
And thanks to everybody who is a subscriber and listener to YPN. If you're not yet a subscriber, click the link in the show notes for your free 30-day trial. We'll see you next time, guys.